What's up, YouTube? So today I want to talk about my top 5 favorite free VST plugins for 2024. So I'm not sure if all of these were actually released this year, but I've recently started using all of these plugins and I've absolutely fallen in love with them. So I want to share this list with you. Hopefully it helps you out. But first, let's quickly talk about the sponsors of today's video. So AudioTool and Spitfire Audio have teamed up with the Esports World Cup to host a remix contest series. There's over $20,000 worth of production gear up for grabs, alongside a trip to London to work with Spitfire Audio at one of the most legendary studios in the world, Abbey Road. It's also a great opportunity to get your music heard by a panel of experienced industry professionals such as BT, Flostradamus, Oakfelder, Michael Maas, and much more. So how does it work? There are a number of remix contests which correspond to the games being played at the Esports World Cup. Participants can choose a remix, download all the content, which includes the official EWC anthem. You can use the DAW of your choice to make your remix and then submit it to AudioTool to enter. The full instructions are available at ewc.audiotool.com, and that will also be linked in the description. A big thanks to AudioTool and the Esports World Cup for sponsoring this video. Anyway, let's dive into today's video. So the first on my list is Yuhi's Zebralette 3. So there's a bit of a caveat with this one. It's not exactly fully released yet. It's still in beta. So I'm going to post the link to where you can get it in the description. There's a KVR forum post with the details and all that stuff. That being said, it's still a really cool plugin that I've been having a lot of fun with. Essentially, it's a kind of state-of-the-art mixture between a wavetable and an additive synthesizer. It uses a mix of this curve morphing system and a thing which they call guides, which allows you to shape your sound in various kind of interesting ways using spectral filters and all sorts of stuff. It's pretty basic in terms of the effects. There's literally just a delay and a reverb. But in terms of the tone shaping capabilities, this is incredible. One of my favorite VST plugins actually of all times, just because it's so different to what we've seen before. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Harmor, you know, with that whole additive engine, but it's got a lot more of an intuitive workflow. Nowadays, I mean, most of the time our DAWs come with so many built-in effects and stuff anyway, so you don't really notice the lack of effects that are built into VST plugins much anymore. These sounds aren't actually in the factory pack. These are presets that I've actually created. I'm going to release them as a preset pack which you can purchase. If you do want to check those kinds of things out, I've got a link to my store in the description. So I want to show you a quick example of the kind of forward thinking of the synthesizer. It basically allows you to draw in like any shape and kind of change the way it morphs between these different shapes. And it's not using traditional wavetables. Like, I guess it is if you're in wavetable mode, but there's several different ways in which you can render the sound. You could either use additive mode, which uses many different spectral voices, which you can then change in interesting ways. Or you can just use traditional wavetable synthesis, which is a little bit lighter on the CPU, if you're just doing these kind of more basic curve shifting type stuff. So essentially what this allows you to do is create maybe more obscure synthesis methods by just drawing in the type of wave shapes. So for example, I tried to emulate a type of synthesis called pulsar synthesis, which uses these kind of pulse-like shapes, and it just kind of squishes them inwards. It's kind of similar to formant synthesis. Okay, so the next two plugins that I want to talk about are actually from an independent developer, I think by the name of Robert van der Helm. I, again, will post links to where you can find them in the description. The first one is called Crisp. It's pretty simple. It doesn't really have much of an interface. Essentially, what it does is it basically just adds a ring-modulated noise to the incoming signal. And so what this is incredibly helpful for is allowing very low sub-harmonics to be audible on smaller sound systems like mobile phones or laptops and that kind of thing. So here, for example, I've got an 808-ish sound, which I created with Zebralette 3. And we're just going to run it through Crisp with a little bit of distortion afterwards. So it's a very simple plugin, like I said, but it's so helpful for allowing those kind of like sub-frequencies to really either come through in a busier mix or to be audible on a smaller sound system. So I've actually got an example here. I believe I've used this technique in this track, in this particular loop over here. So there's a couple of different bassline elements going on here. And one of them is kind of similar to that 808-ish sound. It starts with these kind of higher frequency sounds, but then as it goes lower, in the frequency spectrum, it becomes less audible. So I found just putting a little bit of crisp on there with the amount 9 just really helped for it to poke out in this kind of busier mix. By the way, most of these bass sounds were made with Zebralette, except for that 808-ish sound. I made this in Vital, but then I ended up remaking a very similar sound with Zebralette, which I showed you earlier. So you can make all of these types of sounds with it. Kind of shows the versatility of just that oscillator in that plugin. Super, super versatile. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is called Diopser, again by Robert van der Helm. And this is essentially a kind of like a copy plus more, a kind of evolution on Disperser. So I'm sure you know Disperser. I mentioned it so many times on my channel before. It's by Kiloheartz Disperser. This is just essentially a stack of all-pass filters, which you can pump up to 32. Kind of emulates that effect of multiband processing to the nth degree. Kind of like similar, you know, when people stack OTTs and that kind of sound design technique, kind of emulates that. But now what Diopser does is it emulates Disperser and takes it another step further. So with Disperser, you're limited to 32 stages per instance. So you can obviously double them up to get 64, etc., which is actually what a lot of people do. Diopser allows you to actually take it even further than that. So just straight off the bat, you have the setting allows you to go up to 40 stages. But here, if you turn off safe mode, it's called safe mode for a reason. So just be careful, put a limiter after this or something. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. Just put it down a bit. Cool. This now allows us to push the filter stages up to 512. So this is like stacking like over 10 instances of Disperser with just the single plugin. But it also takes it a slight step further where it allows you to actually change the filtering style over here. So for example, you can change the offset of each of the bands, and you can change whether it's per octave or in linear. I don't really mess with those settings too much. I kind of just pump this up a little bit and play with this to get the kind of desired effect. This is most noticeable on sounds that are quite dynamic. So what I'll do is I'll actually just copy this onto the percussion bus. This is not something I would normally do, but just so that you can hear like the effect of the plugin. So for me, I generally, like when doing these kind of like sound designy things, I generally don't go very high above kind of 50 stages, but it's just helpful to have that kind of extra little boost if you need it, you know? And it's free. So for those who don't have Disperser, I would definitely get that. Although Kiloheartz makes some great stuff, I would definitely, you know, consider getting that one as well, just because kind of sound a little bit different, and Disperser can be used inside Faceplant. And Snap Peep and Multipass and all those kinds of things. So it's kind of a little bit more useful in that regard. So the next plugin I want to look at is called Airwindows Consolidated. This is essentially an all-in-one collection of plugins with a single interface. So it's the collection of plugins made by a developer called Airwindows, and I believe it's somebody from the Surge team that actually put this all-in-one system together. The cool thing about this is I really liked a lot of the Airwindows plugins, but there was a lot of them. So having them all installed in your VST folder can become a little bit tedious. So just having one with the entire collection of plugins is really awesome. Some of these reverbs are really, really cool. Specifically the Galactic 1 and 2, the Cathedral reverbs. I think some of these are modeled on a Bricasti reverb. There's some kind of console models here as well, which is some really, really cool stuff. I guess it's different to like your traditional console plugins, which actually look like a console. It's just the sound. So you really have to kind of dial in your ears to hear what's going on, or use analyzers and scopes. But I think that's cool because you're not skewed by how a plugin looks. It doesn't kind of make that part of the factor in your decision. You know, you're going basically on the sound. So anyway, this is what the Galactic reverb sounds like. Let me actually just show you what the source sound is. So the last plugin that I want to talk about today is Kiloheartz Shaper. So this is really cool because it's a free wave shaper, but it allows you to draw in your own kind of custom shapes, but also save them and recall them whenever you need. So we can actually open up the editor here to get like a little bit more in-depth control. Let me actually just zoom out a little bit. So another really handy feature in this plugin is we have this thing called symmetry. So in freeform mode, you can basically draw a different curve for the bottom and the top half of the waveform. But in symmetry, whatever you do on the top half will be kind of mirrored on the bottom half of the waveform. So this just gives you a little bit more of a kind of natural wave shaper type sound, I guess you could say. I usually drive it up quite a bit so that we can actually hear, you know, what's going on at the top end of the sound. You see, then you can kind of really hear what's going on here. I usually like something kind of like rounded with a little bit of a edge like this for these kind of more 808-ish sounds. It gives it a bite, but not too much of that kind of high frequency, you know? So we can reduce this down a little bit. Okay, so I want to combine this with crisp. Okay, just to round it all out, let's actually just use something from Consolidated on the sound as well. And we've used all of these plugins on a single sound, just because. Perhaps we could use some clipping. So I believe the interesting things with these clips is that they, you should put a tool before and after. So I'm not sure if they have a threshold setting. Do you know what I mean? Awesome. That's about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, if you haven't yet, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.